Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us for this 22nd edition of World Sustainable Summit, India's premier platform for deliberating the discourse around sustainability and climate change. Before we commence this session today, a brief safety announcement during the event here at Stein Auditorium. TERI is a health, safety, and environment certified organization. In case of any untoward incident like fire, evacuation is required. You're required to exit from this auditorium through the fire exit gate nearest to you without any panic. There are 7 exit gates for this auditorium, 4 on the ground floor, right, left, and 2 main entrances. There is 1 exit on the stage and 2 exits in the balcony, which are also the entrances to the balcony. In the case of fire, fire marshals will take positions in the aisles and exit gates to help you evacuate. As we proceed further, it is my great privilege to host you all on behalf of the entire WSDS and TERI family. My name is Mitaksha, and I will be introducing a fantastic line of speakers who are all experts and great leaders in the respective fields for this session on lifestyles for environment, institutions, policies, and social movements. This session will be chaired by Dr. Prodipto Ghosh, Distinguished Fellow, TERI, and our discussant for this session is Dr. Sunil Pandey, a Senior Fellow and Director, Environment and Waste Management Division, TERI. We're happy to have a very distinguished line of speakers who are well-renowned experts in their respective fields and need no introduction. For the Ministerial Address, we have Her Excellency, Ms. Mariam Almheiri, Minister, Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, United Arab Emirates. Dr. Ali Abu Sana, Chief Executive Officer of Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency and Assistant Minister. Global Leadership Address by Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs, Professor, Earth Institute in Columbia University, Professor Jean-Pascal Van Effesel, former IPCC Vice Chair. Global Leadership Messages by Dr. Eric Solheim, former Executive Director of the UN Environment and President Green Belt and Road Institute, BRI Green Development Institute. Dr. Yanis Pochini, Co-Chair International Resource Panel. I now invite Dr. Prodipto Ghosh and Dr. Sunil Pandey to conduct the proceedings for this session and share the chair remarks.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this session on lifestyles for environment. Now, sustainable consumption and production has been a hardy perennial at the climate change negotiations for decades. And of course, it is really the developing countries who unfailingly raise this agenda, and the response from developed countries has always been very interesting idea. But can we get on with the main task of closing down your coal-fired power plants? And it's somewhat similar to the response that developing countries have got when we raise the question of equity. Equity, well, again, interesting idea, but can we talk about closing down the power plants? And by the way, what are you talking about equity? You're talking about equal rights to pollute? I mean, is that what you mean by equity? So these discussions have, over the years, led nowhere. Anyway, at COP26, the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, in his statement, he referred to the need to mainstream lifestyles for environment. And then since then, there has been a buzz around whether we need an international discipline on lifestyles. And of course, I can't say that it has actually resulted in a process of negotiation, but perhaps that may take some time, that may take, some further movement in the negotiations. Anyway, we are at the early stages, and I think we need to discuss what life is about. Now, since 2009, I think, the National Geographic has been assessing some 17 major countries, on the sustainability of their consumption patterns, the consumption patterns of their citizens. In the first Green Index evaluation, India and Brazil tied for the first place. And of course, the North American countries were last. And the European countries were somewhere in between. But they clustered, the developing countries clustered at the top, the North American countries at the bottom, and the European countries somewhere in between. And over the years, this has been the pattern. India has generally been number one. Brazil, if not India, then Brazil has been number two. And China has often been number two as well, number two or number three, and usually number three. Now, what we notice is that if we go down the various editions of the Green Index, there are slight variations in the criteria employed to assess sustainability of consumption. And possibly it is these slight variations in the methodology and criteria that result in slight changing of the ranks. But, however we cut it, the fact is that, the developing countries, major developing countries, are assessed by the National Geographic, a North America-based organization, as most sustainable. Well, on the other hand, in the morning we had someone remark that in the Environment Index, which is often cited, India ranked 180, and the UK ranked number 2. So clearly there is, some real conceptual, issues to be sorted out. And I think we are at the stage where we really have to come to grips with the conceptual aspects of what life means, of what, how do we evaluate sustainability of societies. When we talk of sustainable consumption, what are its linkages to sustainable production? Apart from CO2, what other natural resources, impacts on what other natural resources are we concerned with? Water, forests, soil. How do we address the fact that the same source of utility of a consumer may necessarily be met by different things in different societies? And this is something like the challenges that economists face when they try to construct the purchasing power index, purchasing power parity index. So there are many conceptual issues. But then, of course, when we go from the conceptual issues to try and talk of a process for reaching a global discipline on sustainable on life, then we need to translate the conceptual aspects into a set of high-level principles. And then, of course, when we come to the high-level principles, we then have to talk about how far back do we go in addressing sustainability of societies. The UK's ranking as number 2 on the environmental index clearly washes away all its past sins since the invention of the steam engine by James Watt. There's also the question of equity. How do we factor in equity in arriving at lifestyle? So there are a whole set of thorny conceptual issues. And then, of course, when we start talking of a discipline, are there other international disciplines from where we can learn lessons or which we can synergize with? For example, do the Sustainable Development Goals and their indicators, do they hold a lesson? Do the goals of life, are they in many cases congruent with some of the Sustainable Development Goals? The advantage, of course, of looking at the lessons from Sustainable Development Goals is that we have a policy, institutional, monitoring structure with respect to the SDGs, and perhaps we can rely on that structure, or we can replicate that structure or learn lessons from it. So there are indeed many, many different issues to be talked about when we look at the question of an international discipline on life. It is still early days, as I said, and we have a long way to go. But yes, I think it is very good indeed that we are having a discussion on life at the WSDS, and presumably this will carry on into many other, global political and academic forums, research forums. So we have a very distinguished panel of speakers, and our first speaker is Her Excellency Mrs. Mariam Almheiri. She's Minister for Climate Change and Environment of the UAE. So I would request her to kindly make her statement.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me. And I want to also thank the Republic of India, the current G20 president, for having me here at WSDS 2023. The LIFE initiative really reflects a true empowerment of the community to solve for global challenges. As you rightly stated, we really need to reflect and look into, our everyday lives, how we're living it, what we're buying at the supermarket, what we're throwing away, what transportation means are we using, how we're using water. That there's so many aspects that we can do, and these little incremental changes can make such a huge difference. For the UAE, this year is a very special year. It's the year of sustainability. Also the year that we'll be hosting COP28, and I saw in the panel before me, my colleague, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, was there, the COP president designate for COP28. And I'm sure he already spoke about all the aspects that we'll be looking at COP28, from mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, finance, and innovation. Now, what's really important, and as you've already set the scene, these 12 pillars that formulate the LIFE initiative, they're really extensive, and they cover long range of sustainability aspects, including food security, responsible consumption and production, greening the economy, promoting social inclusion, empowering behavioral changes in communities, and fostering innovations. And all those aspects form a really significant part of our national vision and policies. And I just want to share with you some of the things that we're doing here in the UAE. So we have the circular economy policy, and this is a first of its kind in the region. It targets the adoption of the circular economy concept in 4 priority areas: green infrastructure, sustainable transportation, sustainable manufacturing, and sustainable food production and consumption. We also have the UAE's general environmental policy, and this provides a kind of umbrella framework for the country's environmental protection efforts. We also have the UAE Green Growth Strategy, and this is a whole of government strategy that really aims to spearhead the country's shift towards a low carbon intensive economy. And it basically has 6 tracks: green energy, green economy, green buildings, sustainable environment, optimal resource use, and green technology. We also have our sustainable finance framework, and this basically aims to set up cooperation between the public and private sectors and channel private capital towards low carbon, environmentally sustainable, and climate resilient investments. And of course, all these are feeding into preparing us for our long-term low carbon development strategy that aligns with the Glasgow Climate Pact. And some things that we're doing as well, especially when we're thinking of SDG 12 on promoting responsible consumption and production, is really awareness. And we've conducted several public awareness campaigns to encourage more sustainable production. We also launched Ni'ma. Ni'ma in Arabic means blessing. And this is the national program for tackling food loss and food waste, because we are one of the high countries when it comes to food loss and food waste per capita. So it's really important that we slash our food loss and food waste at least by 50% by 2030. And Ni'ma is basically the national initiative that we've launched to kind of get all stakeholders involved, from the individual, community, private sector, government, to really tackle the food loss and food waste. These are just some examples that I wanted to share, but I really feel, and I often say to a lot of the international fora that I speak on, it's not just government or private sector. Each of us individually have a role to play to encourage that we live in a more sustainable way, because basically I often say climate change is about, we've been disrespecting nature for too long. We've been over-consuming for too long. And now we really have to think about every small action that we can do, because this accumulates and will make a difference. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Madam, Your Excellency, Madam Mariam Almheiri, for your statement. I will not attempt to summarize the statements of the participants, of the speakers, in the interest of time management, and Dr. Sunil Pandey, who will be the discussant and he will speak at the end, perhaps he would like to do that. So our next speaker is His Excellency Dr. Ali Abu Senna. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency and Assistant Minister. So Dr. Senna, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting us for this very important summit. And I would like first to thank the government of India for gathering us in this very important session, and also would like to convey the best regards of Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, which is eager to be with us today, but she has another commitment. So, ladies and gentlemen, heads of states, governments, ministers, scientists, and entrepreneurs, it's such an honor to be here with you today. We are all striving to achieve the goals of the Sustainable Development, and this will be reflecting too much on improving the life style for all developing and developed countries. The comprehensive concepts of sustainable development will not be achieved without participation on the international level, and as well as partnership on national level between all stakeholders at government sector, private sector, scientists, research centers, in addition to studying past experience, working to understand reality and trying to change it for the better to achieve optimal exploitation of natural resources and benefit from human power, with the importance of gaining experience and continuing education of knowledge and its application. So the sustainable development achievements in Egypt was always linked to drawing up strategies and strategies and plans that would integrate the environmental decisions and the climate actions in all economic and development sectors through the Sustainable Development Strategy Egypt Vision 2030 and the National Climate 2050. So let me give some examples related to achieving the sustainable development goals at national level. For example, at food and water nexus is very important for us. So regarding food, we were aiming to raise agricultural productivity, the aim of achieving export and regional food security. This in relation to economic sustainability, improving returns from the agriculture sector and ensuring food security for citizens at reasonable prices, while the Ministry of Environment, in cooperation with the relevant ministries, is keeping to preserve international agricultural lands, water, fish wealth, and wildlife. Economic sustainability seeks to ensure availability of sufficient supplies of water and optimal use of water in industrial, agriculture, rural, and urban sectors, and not to waste these important resources. The government is making great efforts to protect all surface of groundwater and from pollution causes, and improve the infrastructure to improve quality and relevant waste in all and its agriculture and industrial domestic uses. So I will just go briefly with some of the very important measures at policy level has been taken by the Egyptian government. So, for example, at the policy level, the Ministry of Environment, in cooperation with the Ministry of Planning, have already prepared the first environmental sustainability standard guidelines in 2021, which have been approved by the cabinet with the aim of greening the state budget with the aim of reaching 50% of green projects within 3 years, preserving natural resources and protecting the ecosystem. Also, as we were organizing the COP27, the National Climate Change Strategy in Egypt 2050 have been launched in May 2022, and with a very concise three main goals to achieve the sustainable economic growth and low emission development, and also linking this to the very important development sectors in Egypt. In addition to this, we have also launched our NDCs document, our National Determined Contribution document, which is very important for Egypt, which putting a very clear target until 2030, with a main focus on three sectors: the power sector, and also the oil and gas sector and transportation sector, and it has a very clear mandate and target. For example, for the power sector, we are aiming to achieve by 2030 33% reduction in the CO2 from implementing our NDCs. So in addition to this, we were working also on capacity building levels to raise awareness on sustainable development goals and tools for all other stakeholders related to our mainstreaming and other ministries. Also, we were also focusing related to participation of the NGOs and community. So we're supporting participation of youth, women, children in all campaigns adopted by the Ministry of Environment under the umbrella of the presidential initiative Life Green, just to ensure that the NGOs has a role in our effort to reach our sustainable goals. In addition to this, I would like also to highlight a very important measures that we are also working related to encourage the investment in the national park and national resources. So we are putting a plan and roadmap for environmentally sound management of our national parks and allowing to private sector to invest with environmentally friendly projects in our national parks. This is something to include also the national community in such development. At the end, I would like to highlight that achieving sustainable development is a must for all of us. Taking this ahead and participation of all relevant stakeholders to achieve it is a very keen. We are very keen to do this. Ensuring the achievement of the desired economic and social progress is a priority to us. So I'm happy to be with all of you today to just change this experience, and looking forward for moving forward with you for the reality for achieving the sustainable development goals and moving from just commitment to just the implementation. Thank you for all, and wish you all the best in the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Ali Abu Senna, CEO of the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency and Assistant Minister, for your statement. I now invite Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Well, he needs no introduction. He's been on every WSDS that I can remember, and he has been, on the dais twice this morning already. So, Professor Sachs, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question that we're discussing this afternoon, which is how our lives and lifestyles would change in a sustainable world. And I think the answer is a bit subtle. For some things, almost no change at all, and for other things, rather large changes. So let me make my own list of this, thinking about this. What if we do decarbonize the economy, stop the land degradation, begin reforesting, and really set policies that make those changes real, rapid, and successful by the year 2050? How would our lives differ along that trajectory compared to the one that we are on? My list is the following. In the morning, most of us switch on the light. The big difference in a decarbonized world is that the power that is transmitted to our homes or our appliances will be zero carbon power rather than fossil fuel based power. So instead of a coal-fired power plant, it'll be a solar field. Will that affect our lifestyles? Almost not at all. We won't know, most people don't know when they switch on the light what's going on except that the light goes on. And I think for a lot of the transformation, it's basically on the systems that we live on, especially the power grid, that will be deeply transformed. So that's an example for me of something that doesn't affect our lifestyle but is a fundamental part of the transformation. That requires government regulation, simply no new fossil-fired power plants, period. Because now the alternatives are at parity in cost as long as the financing problem is solved. So it's really a financial problem, not a technology problem. A second example, when I get into an automobile, I never really understood how it worked. I guess I understood a little bit. But whether it is an internal combustion engine or an electric vehicle isn't going to change my lifestyle very much. And we're all going to be in electric vehicles rather than in internal combustion engine vehicles in the future. That's not really a lifestyle change. The cars will drive better. They probably will drive by themselves to an important extent. But it's not really a lifestyle change. It's just a shift of technology literally under the hood. Don't ask me too much about cooking, but we're going to move from natural gas cooking or open fire cooking to electric cooking substantially. I think it won't make such a lifestyle difference. I'm not the great expert in that, but it seems to me that's another example of a technological change, pretty basic, that is not going to change lifestyles. In my home, in my flat in New York, we need heating in the winter. I won't really know or care whether the heating is an electric heat pump, where the heat pump is powered by zero carbon electricity, or whether it is natural gas heating. That's another non-lifestyle change. We're still going to heat our flats in cold climates, but how we heat them will mean whether they are carbon emitting or not emitting technologies. When our ocean vessels bring us the big containers of goods in the future, which they will be bringing them most likely with hydrogen combustion rather than fossil fuel combustion. Not a lifestyle change, just a technology change under the hood again. So for a huge amount of this transformation, it's really a change of technology, not a change of lifestyle. An example of this 30 years ago was the shift from chlorofluorocarbons to hydrofluorocarbons, which didn't involve any lifestyle change. It involved a technology change to avoid the chlorine dissociation of the CFCs that led to ozone depletion. Of course, HFCs have their own problems, but still it was a technology change, not a behavioral change. So those are examples where at least 50% of the problem, maybe 75% of the problem is not really behavioral. It is technological. And I think the technology solutions that are adequate are already clear, and they will get better in the future. Maybe we really will have hydrogen-driven power rather than renewable energy power 30 years from now. It's not impossible. But in any event, it's, again, we're going to use electricity for our appliances, our cooking, our transport, and so on. So what are some of the areas where behavioral change is almost certain to be part of the situation? Well, if we want to not only stop deforestation, but really account for the emissions from the agriculture sector, those changes would induce a large rise of price of beef. Because if you internalize all the externalities of a cow, not the way cows are treated in India, but the way that we eat them in the United States in hamburgers, they would be a lot more expensive. And the conclusion of that is people are going to eat less beef. That is a behavioral change that is quite significant, actually, a few percent of total greenhouse gas emissions probably, by change of diet to a more Indian-style diet, I would say. More vegetarian, more respect for the cattle, and less cattle ranching in the rainforest margins. Yes, this is a good idea that you have. A second behavioral change is, in general, we will economize on some forms of energy use. One of them will be less car travel. The car dependency of our civilizations is a little bit of madness, especially since we ended up spending so much of our lives in traffic jams or commuting. And now that we have digital connectivity, work from home, work from your favorite coffee shop, work from anywhere, this is really going to cut down on our transport use in general. We're going to walk more, we will bicycle more. European cities are being recovered from the automobile, not so American cities yet, but it will happen more. And we'll plan a future without private car ownership. It's not really needed. It's just was a 20th century not bad idea, but it's a 21st century not needed idea, I would say. So we're going to reshape our cities and have a lot less travel and have a lot less going to the office, by the way, because we're going to be able to do useful things in different ways. Third, it's been very hard for me, but my wife has gotten me to do it after 20 years, and that is proper management of our wastes at home. We will take care of all the garbage in a more effective way. Packaging, in much less use of plastics. We'll bring our bags to the market with us rather than have heavily packaged items. We will recycle. It's a little bit hard to simply internalize through a price. It is behavioral change at the most local level. It's happening, but it needs to happen vastly more. We will have higher taxes on the rich in any viable, sustainable development solution. Probably the United States will be the last country to implement this because it is the country of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. But we'll get there eventually because it turns out if you're run by a few billionaires, it's not really so great for you. Life expectancy in the United States is the same place it's been for 25 years ago because the system is miserably rigged for the rich not for the general person in society. So higher taxes on the rich, that's a behavioral change that the rich are going to have to get used to. We're all going to need more lifelong education, because the kind of world that we're going to be entering will be a world of different skills, changing skills, different occupations, lots of online learning, lots of certification through life. So it's going to be a more education-based lifelong learning. Next, it's going to be more urban for sure. Rural life is tough, and providing services in rural areas is tough. And agriculture is going to be really automated, basically, in almost every area of agriculture. And that's a lifestyle change for the 40% of the world population still in rural areas. That will go down to 20%. We'll have an 80% urban world in the next 40 years for lots and lots of reasons, but most fundamentally, agriculture will be done by robot planters, pickers, fertilizer depositors, and so forth. So it's going to be a different life anyway. And it is already the fact in almost all the world, but not yet in Africa and in a very few places, we'll have relatively smaller families. So most families now are 2 children or fewer in most of the world. In Africa, fertility rates are still 4 or higher, but they will come down sharply. And so this will be a different kind of life as well. Smaller, more nuclear families, older populations, a bigger care economy. So transformation in this way. So my conclusion, spurred by your this very good question of this session, is that it's really a mix. We won't solve maybe 3/4 of the emissions through lifestyle changes. They will be solved through technological transformations. But our lives will change considerably in the future. And frankly, when I look on the list, by and large, they'll change to a much better life if we really adhere to sustainable development precepts. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, for this brief but very wide-ranging set of ideas that you have put across, and it really gives us a lot to think about. So thank you very much indeed for your statement. Now I invite Professor Jean-Paul Pascal Van Yepesele. I hope I haven't murdered your name. Former chair of the IPCC, former vice chair of the IPCC. So Professor Yepesele, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this question. And of course, speaking about the previous speakers and the speech of Jeffrey Sachs in particular, I will, of course, do my best not to repeat some of the elements, very important elements, which were mentioned, and bring maybe some complementary aspects using some of the perspectives of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I had the honor to vice chair under the leadership of Eke Pachori between 2008 and 2015. And I'll start first by bringing an element that has not been brought into this discussion, and that is that first, we should remember maybe why we're discussing that. And one of the reasons is that lifestyles, all lifestyles, will be affected by climate change. If we look at all the changes in the climate system, the local increases in extreme temperature, the extreme precipitation often leading to floods, the melting glaciers in many parts of the world, the effects on agriculture, the effects sometimes on infrastructure, and the effects last but not least, on nature and ecosystems, sometimes contributing to price increases in food, for example. They all have some influence on our lifestyles. And as usual, unfortunately, as the IPCC has written many times, the lifestyles of the most vulnerable are much more affected in those climate-induced circumstances than the lifestyles of the other inhabitants of this planet, even though progressively all inhabitants of the planet's lifestyle will be affected increasingly by climate change. Second point, well, why is this climate change, which is affecting or starting to affect those lifestyles, changing? Well, because basically we have been using the atmosphere as a big dustbin, as a free dustbin mostly. And as we heard this morning, the size of the dustbin the inhabitants of this planet are using on a daily basis is not the same everywhere. It's much bigger, sorry Jeff, in North America,
Of course.
and Europe than, for example, in India. Someone remarked that the dustbins here were very small compared to the dustbins we have in the global north. And the same is true for an invisible form of waste that doesn't go in the dustbin on the ground, but the invisible waste that we are emitting through our emissions of greenhouse gases, CO2 in particular. Because if we look at the individual emissions, the per capita emissions in different parts of the world, they are very different. And we all know, and I'm not going to quote numbers here, they are well known, that the emissions per capita in developed countries, let's say, are much larger on average, on an individual basis, than in developing countries. And of course, this very factual information, this scientific fact, which has been assessed at length by IPCC on the basis of the literature, is at the root of a principle which is as fundamental in the climate negotiations as the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. And also at the root of the concept of historical responsibilities, because one of those waste products, CO2 in particular, stays in the atmosphere very long. So emissions that took place 100 or 150 years ago are still, at least in part, present in the atmosphere, exerting their effect. So in summary, the rich members of the community pollute much more, also in terms of greenhouse gases, and they have to act first, whether because there's a tax on them, as Jeffrey Sachs just mentioned, as a possibility, or through other measures. But it's clear that those who have to change their lifestyles in order to reduce their environmental footprint and carbon footprint in particular are those who emit the most first. Now, third point, looking at the carbon footprint and the differences in those carbon footprints, we just mentioned some of the problems associated with that differentiated footprint. But we also need to look at on the solution side. And there the IPCC has been quite clear in its latest report, published last April, the Working Group 3 report. And that is that on the global level, taking the potential contributions in key sectors, in particular energy, transport, housing, and agriculture, action on demand not on production, but on demand. And of course, lifestyles are a very important factor to explain demand of product and services. So action on demand on the horizon of 2050 has the potential to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 70% compared to the reference scenarios. So that's a big number. That's a big number. And in that framework, the IPCC remarked also that demand management doesn't mean demand reductions everywhere. Because of course there are equity considerations to have as well. In some parts of the world, indeed, there should be a decrease in the usage of resources which are overused and sometimes overwasted. While in other parts of the world, and it was mentioned by Sultan Al-Jaber, among others, earlier today, there's still a need to increase access to basic resources and to ask them to reduce their demand and to change their lifestyle so they would consume less would be totally unacceptable, of course. So there's a big differentiation to consider in those different measures. The last point I'd like to make, and again on the basis of the latest IPCC report of Working Group 3 published last April, and that will be probably emphasized in the the next and final synthesis report that the IPCC will release to the world on March 20, just in 1 month from now. And that is that lifestyles are, of course, led by individuals. We're talking about individual lifestyles, right? But there's a collective aspect to that notion. It's not a question only to be solved by individuals. Governments, the private sector, many actors have a big responsibility in actually providing the right context in terms of economic framework, regulation, legislation, economic incentives, taxes maybe, to facilitate action by the individuals. I mean, it's very nice to say everybody, or as many people as possible, should use public transport in order to decrease individual car usage or to use bicycles. But if that public transport is not made available, it's not affordable, it's not secure, if the bicycles have to share the space with dangerous cars driving too fast, etc., it's not going to happen. You can talk to the individuals to ask them to change their lifestyle. It's not going to happen. So the global the framework dimension of those changes in lifestyle is very important. And in that context, I'd like to thank the President-designate of COP28 and also Minister Almheiri for their earlier comments about the importance that COP28 will have in that perspective. Because, yes, lifestyles need to change, but the framework needs to be there to facilitate those changes. The citizens are mostly ready to make many changes, but policymakers must provide the appropriate framework. And the international climate negotiations, in which I know you have been associated for so long, have a very important role to play in that framework. And if I can complete my intervention by this, I think that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is providing scientific information to policymakers, will also have an increasingly important and clear role to facilitate these moves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Diepasele, for this, very cogent but, very comprehensive presentation. So I now call upon Dr. Erik Solheim, former Executive Director of UN Environment and President of the Green Belt and Road Research Institute, the BRI, Green Development Institute. So Dr. Solheim, you have the floor.
First, I'm so happy to be with old friends like Jeff Sachs and Janusz Bartosznik, but in particular to be with all the great people of TERI. You are doing a fantastic job for India and for the world, so just please be proud of what you have achieved and keep up your good work. We need you so much in the years to come. If you wish to be inspired to act on the environment, I find no better place to go than to the old Indian texts. Look, the old Indians, they venerated nature. They put nature in so high esteem that they made God half human, half animal. Ganesh being half elephant, half human, Hanuman being half monkey, half human. And they held the animal kingdom so high that they said, the cow is our mother. We need to pay respect to nature by paying respect to the cow. This is so inspiring because you find similar in Islam, in Christianity, in all great thought systems, but this is inspiring for a positive change agenda also in the 21st century. Because what we actually need is a positive agenda for change, not a negative one. The last thing we need when it comes to lifestyle changes is rich people telling the poor how they should live their lives, intellectuals running around finger pointing to the working people about their lifestyle, or for that matter, developed nations telling the developing world how they shall act. Look, US emissions per capita up to today are 25 times Indian emissions per capita up to today. Still you find Westerners preaching to India as how India should act. It's completely crazy. But we must avoid this negative finger-pointing agenda and put up a positive agenda for lifestyle change. And of course, I agree completely with Jeff. It's mainly about change in society, political decisions as how to organize society, business decisions how we drive technology to scale a change. But adding to that, we may also add the component of lifestyle change. What would a positive agenda for lifestyle change look like? I have some suggestions. First, a positive agenda will bring us closer to nature. It will tap into the love every human people have for nature. In their village, their place, their park, wherever they go, every human being has a love for nature. And we need to tap into that and turn it into a positive force for the environment. And we see this happening in many places in India now. Hyderabad was just dedicated as the green city of the world for 2022. Why? Because the government of Telangana has put up huge urban parks in Hyderabad, making it a very lively city. I think it's the fastest growing city in India because people simply want to go and live in a city which is close to nature. Shenzhen in China is a lot of the same. The chief minister of the state of Madhya Pradesh is planting 1 tree every day. Well, that makes a small little forest just by Mr. Chauhan, but of course, much more importantly, he inspired 80 million people in the state of Madhya Pradesh to go and plant trees. And in the state of Tamil Nadu, Chief Minister Stalin just announced that Tamil Nadu will increase its green cover from 22 to 32% of the state, and this is a huge state, the size of Germany, in the next decade. So this is adopting this green, close to nature agenda, which nearly all people really want. We wish to be closer to nature, to experience the birds singing, to go out in the forest. Secondly, a positive agenda also is about health and city development. I mean, Jeff and others have spoken about that. European cities like Copenhagen or Amsterdam, or indeed Janor's home city of Ljubljana, have made it possible to walk. You can walk in the city, you can bicycle in the city. There is great public transport. that makes the city a lot more healthy and a lot more joyful. People want to live in this kind of city all over the world. People are flocking to the greener cities where you can have a much more nicer lifestyle. It's joyful and it's healthy, and that's a positive agenda. Thirdly, a positive agenda for lifestyle changes is also about food. Indeed, we need to change into a more vegetarian diet. But the last thing which will bring us there is intellectuals running around telling working people, oh, you must not eat as much beef. It will bring us absolutely nowhere. If anything, it will bring the exact opposite of what is needed. What will bring us to a more vegetarian diet, maybe to be inspired by India, because India is the most vegetarian diet anywhere in the world. I was just in Latin America. A lot of people said, oh, it's so difficult to be vegetarian here. I wish I were in India, where vegetarianism is high on the agenda. It's a positive proposition where you can have any number of spicy, nice, good vegetarian dishes. And of course, it's not about stopping eating meat, but of having a positive agenda on moving into a vegetarian diet. There was a research paper speaking about how Americans will move into a more vegetarian diet. The last selling point was no meat, because it's focused on what you don't get. The best was to launch a dish as Hawaii hot pot with the greenest and most spicy vegetables from the fantastic island of Hawaii. So also the diet or the food agenda must be a positive one if you want to succeed. And a positive environment change or lifestyle change agenda is about jobs. There's 1 million young Indians joining the labor market every single month. All of them want a well-paid, decent job where they can contribute to society. And the lifestyle change is about contributing these jobs and, of course, going into a circular economy, going into renewable energies. It creates more and better jobs. And that's about lifestyle change, but it comes also from organizing society. And lastly, very important in these days, lifestyle change is about creating a culture of peace. Because without peace, everything is so much more difficult. Wars destroy human lives, kill people, but wars destroy environment, but also wars detract. It detract attention because we are focused on the wars rather than of solving the greatest challenges of the 21st century to bring everyone out of extreme poverty and to solve the environment problem. So we need to create a culture of peace as part of our green agenda. And again, there is no better place to be inspired than in the old Indian text. Dr. Prodipto was so fond of quoting the old Vedas where he said, the whole universe is one family, and that we should take to heart in the 21st century. United States and China, Europe and India, let's all work together on this great green agenda for better lifestyles in the 21st century, solving the biggest problems of our generation.
Thank you, Dr. Solheim, for this inspirational address. And then I turn to Dr. Janez Potoknik, co-chair of the International Resource Panel. So, Dr. Potoknik, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Hi, everybody from Slovenia. Thank you, TERI, for invitation. It is indeed good to be among many good friends again. I'm eager to ensure that UNEP's International Resource Panel contribution to your valuable efforts would be felt. IRP, which I co-chaired together with Isabella Teixeira, is a science policy interface brought together to assess trends and impacts of resource use and, crucially, future outlooks and solutions. Our work has shown that material extraction and processing are driving the triple planetary crisis. They cause 50% of global climate impacts, over 90% of land-related biodiversity loss and water stress, and over a third of health-related pollution impacts. By changing how we extract and consume resources, we have a huge opportunity to actually simultaneously address all the crises. India's G20 presidency is a real opportunity to impact global action on a triple crisis through the LIFE initiative by internalizing it and ensuring LIFE is taken forward by leadership in other G20 countries. G20 countries represent, as you know, an important part of global population and even higher, 75% of carbon emission share. Reducing them, it's clearly a must. The focus should be on efforts to meet human needs and maximize well-being by optimizing the use of energy and materials to reduce their climate and biodiversity footprints. For high-income countries, this would mean using less energy and less materials. Modeling by International Energy Agency shows the huge power of the consumption change strategies within LIFE. If they were implemented worldwide, they would achieve 1/5 of the emission reductions needed by 2030. Leading science of our IPCC colleagues, as explained by Jean-Pascal, shows where demand-side lifestyle changes would make most difference, and unsurprisingly, it is in the high-income countries. Emission reduction potential from lifestyle change in high-income countries is about 3 to 4 times greater than in developing countries. However, despite huge potential, most climate policies and national plans still neglect systemic resource efficiency in their NDC submissions, as well as in their national biodiversity plans. Focusing only on supply-side efforts, as important as that is, will not deliver our climate and environmental targets. We must exploit the potential of demand-side measures, which would also get us closer to the questions related to responsibility and equity. We must stop ignoring the inherent wastefulness of our production and consumption. For example, it would be in vain to decarbonize the production of steel, as important as that is, if it is used to produce underutilized cars and empty houses, just contributing to traffic and property market bubbles, but not to real social prosperity. Resource efficiency, especially in high-income countries and among wealthy people, should thus be complemented with sufficiency-based policies and behavior, limiting their footprints. And this can indeed happen without drama, as Jeffrey and Eric explained, but with a goodwill and taking responsibility. LIFE measures do include demand-side change, but there is certainly scope to go even further. Last year, I worked intensively with G7 on the need for the world's richest countries to reduce their absolute resource use. The G7's climate and environment communique and their 2022 resource efficiency roadmap committed to leveraging the full power of resource strategies in their national climate and biodiversity plans. And I hope this thinking can be taken forward also by G20 through internationalizing the LIFE initiative. To conclude, trying to maintain the current economic system and at the same time fixing the chronic triple planetary crisis is not consistent and just creates a lot of confusion and lobbying. Taking painkillers will not heal chronic diseases, rather hide them and make them worse. Few basic shifts are needed. First, we need to shift from currently still prevailing reality putting humans in function of economic success to an economy which will be in function of delivering functionalities and meeting human needs. We need to set the order right. Second, we need to move from an economy considering humans as external and superior to nature to an economy acknowledging that we are embedded with nature. Destroying nature is destroying ourselves. Third, we need to move from an extraction-based production to creation-based production. We should stop stimulating extraction-based economic success and rather reward the responsible, innovative, creative ways of meeting human needs. And finally, we should fix our governance structures and make them fit for purpose. The world has changed. In 1972, when the Club of Rome released the famous The Limits to Growth, it was 3.8 billion people on the planet. A few weeks ago, we surpassed 8 billion. We moved from an empty world dominated by nature to the full world dominated by humans. We must shift from an egoistic, short-term based interest governance structures and logic to cooperation and sharing sovereignty. We must introduce a well-needed intergenerational pact. In short, we must improve and secure our collective resilience. Dear friends, access to and use of natural resources have been in the human history always closely related to the level of well-being achieved, but also to stability, to security, conflicts, wars. Just remember importance of access to land, water, oil and gas, minerals, or precious metals. The whole history of the colonialization of nature, they were always central also to fairness and equity, and they still are. The lessons learned are more than convincing to understand that changing our relationship with nature is ultimately not only environmental, but also an economic, equity, security, resilience imperative. This relationship, it's not stable nor balanced, and it will be resolved either with collective wisdom and effort or in a hard and very painful way, through conflicts, through hunger, pandemics, migration. This is the choice we have. Thus, we must broaden and strengthen our front of stakeholders, advocating for change and put the current challenges in a global strategic context because they belong there. This is the goal the incoming IRP's Global Resource Outlook 2024 will try to contribute to. Thank you for helping us delivering the future we want. And back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Janez Potočnik. I mean, that was a visionary statement. I mean, you set out several paradigm shifts that we need to, implement, internalize, carry forward. So thank you very much indeed. So now we turn to our discussant, Dr. Sunil Pandey. He's the director in TERI. So, Dr. Pandey, you have the floor. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
In another 5 minutes, I'll summarize. And thank you very much. So what I'll do is, for the want of, as we have only 5 minutes around, so I'll quickly summarize the discussion points which were discussed by our very eminent panelists. So to start with, why life changes are required. Climate change was identified as a key driver. Also, unsustainable resource use, which also in the last also pointed out by our IRP panelists. Though life is a call for individual responsibilities, how individuals can work towards sustainable lifestyles, and but there was an agreement that it has to be collective action by every stakeholder in the process, whether it is government or industry or individuals as individual. Life approach also, it was clearly mentioned that it has a linkage to terms which we have been discussing recently in terms of circular economy, resource efficiency, low carbon development, zero carbon, as also pointed by Professor Sachs, who actually, the interventions which he was providing was looking like science fiction. Probably we would be able to achieve all that with much less friction, as also pointed out by other panelists. And that is the way which we want to go. Global partnership is required on achieving the benefits of life and also addressing by achieving implementing life and for addressing the climate change issues. There's also discussion on few key issues which different countries are looking at, and food wastage emerged as one of the key issues. Also, energy access in terms of surplus energy to some countries, some individuals, and also, but there's a huge unserved population. So demand management or demand, addressing the demand emerged out as a key issue, but also not, there was a consensus that when we look at addressing demand, it should be basically targeted towards demand which is on consumption side, rather than trying to pressurize people who don't have sufficient resources to basically manage, and looking at how graded responsibility can be fixed on whether it is taxation or whether it is resource use or whether it is energy use, so that over-consuming population consumes less, and the population which is unserved yet gets chance to use those resources while developing. And behavior change, of course, is something which was also pointed out by panelists, and how these behavior changes can happen. And it was also clearly brought out by Professor Sachs that there are some changes which would require only technological interventions, and time has probably come where those technological changes are possible. There are some difficult issues like waste management. We also have been facing the same issues relating to these, where behavior changes are difficult to come. When we look at looking at need for cleaner environment, probably these changes need to come. And what was also pointed out was to internalize these life measures which are required. One needs to have a global enabling framework and institutions which can induce these changes, not only at the individual level, but also covering other stakeholders. Creating jobs through, it was also pointed out as an important measure, and we all know that circular economy, which is which we are looking at as an important driver for bringing in resource efficiency, has already projected, there are studies which have already projected that there is a business opportunity of around $4.5 trillion US dollars if we can embrace circular economy, a way of looking at things globally by 2030. So naturally, there are advantages in going the way the panelists have suggested that we should go, and also embrace the principles of life, which is again, lifestyle for environment. With these few remarks, for want of time, I'll close my summary here, and I'll ask Dr. Ghosh if I have missed out on anything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for this very masterful summary of, very extensive and complex proceedings. So, before we close the session, let me thank all our speakers, Her Excellency Madam Mariam Almheiri, Minister for Climate Change and Environment, UAE, Dr. Ali Abu Sena, CEO of Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency and Assistant Minister, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Jean-Pascal van Jepersele, Dr. Eric Solheim, Dr. Janez Potoknik, and of course, our very own Dr. Sunil Pandey. So thank you all very much, and this session is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.